Dungeon Reaper. A light novel by Bloodmoss. Chapter 12, Between Shadows and Steel. The room wasn't much to look at, just 4 plain walls, a futon neatly folded in the corner, and a small dresser that looked older than he was. But to Cain, it might as well have been a palace. He ran his hand over the smooth wood of the dresser, feeling the craftsmanship beneath his fingertips. It wasn't luxurious, but it was leagues ahead of sleeping in the Battle Wagon, curled around a toolkit and praying for decent weather. He flopped down on the futon, letting out a long sigh. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that came with clean walls and no lingering smell of gasoline. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of his usual life, and for a moment, he just lay there, staring at the ceiling. "This is actually happening," he muttered to himself. Hoshi, he really shouldn't think of the Shihan like that, even in private, hadn't just given him training, he'd handed him stability on a silver platter. A place to stay, a teacher who seemed genuinely interested in seeing him improve, and, best of all, no Penny yelling at him for falling asleep on the couch in the hollow blade break room. He smirked at the thought, already picturing Penny's face when she realized she couldn't nag him about that anymore. His gaze shifted to the corner of the room where the kusarigama rested against the wall. The baby scythe, as he'd decided to call it, still looked a little ridiculous to him. But as he stared at it, something about its simplicity felt right. It wasn't the scythe he dreamed of, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction. Cain pushed himself up and crossed the room, picking up the weapon. The curved blade caught the dim light, the chain dangling loosely from his hand. He swung it experimentally, letting the weight of the chain pull it through the air. "Not bad," he said, turning it over in his hand. "For a starter kit." The faintest vibration rippled through his hand, so soft he almost missed it. He froze, holding the weapon steady, but the sensation was gone as quickly as it had come. His brow furrowed. Then he felt it again, this time in the pit of his stomach, a faint pulse, like a tiny bell ringing in the distance. Cain's grip on the kusarigama tightened as the feeling grew stronger. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent, like a low hum just beneath his skin. The in-between was calling. Cain groaned, setting the kusarigama back against the wall. "Of course," he muttered, already moving toward the small door that led to his bathroom. At least the place had its own stand-up shower, a luxury compared to public gyms and truck stops. He turned the faucet and waited for the water to heat up, peeling off his shirt and tossing it onto the dresser. 5 minutes, he muttered, stepping into the shower as the steam began to rise. The vibrations grew stronger, a familiar rumble that resonated deep in his core. Tara had already warned him it was their weekly meeting, and he knew what that meant. When he crossed into the in-between, he wouldn't be Cain Rose anymore. He'd be Keith Noland, the body tied to his spiritual form, like a second skin he couldn't escape. The shift to the in-between was always jarring. One moment, Cain was stepping out of his shower, his mind on mundane things, and the next, he was falling, his stomach lurching in that unsettling, roller coaster drop way. When the movement stopped, he found himself perched awkwardly on a stool at the counter of Caffè Afterlife. The faint hum of the place wrapped around him like static, soft but persistent, as if the world itself wasn't quite settled. The counter beneath his elbows felt solid, but the black and white checkerboard tiles behind it seemed to ripple faintly, like an image distorted by water. He blinked, trying to orient himself, before noticing Edgar sitting a stool down, absently spinning a porcelain mug between his hands. Cain glanced over, offering a lopsided grin. "Hey, Edgar. Long time no see." Edgar tilted his head, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. "I'd say it's been exactly 7 days. Same as always." His tone was flat, but there was something amused in his expression, like he was trying not to smirk. Cain chuckled, drumming his fingers on the counter. "Fair point. So, what's new in Edland?" Edgar shrugged. "Nothing exciting. The usual souls. The occasional dungeon cleanup. You know how it is." "Yeah, about that," Cain said, leaning forward slightly. "How do you manage to, not look completely freaked out every time something unearthly jumps out at you. Shin turned the mug in his hands thoughtfully before answering. Experience. You see enough twisted horrors crawling out of dungeons, and they start to lose their edge. Besides, he paused, glancing sidelong at Cain. The real nightmares aren't in the low-level dungeons. They're what happens when the souls aren't collected in time. Cain raised an eyebrow. Cryptic. Love that for me. Edgar's lips twitched into a faint smile, but he said nothing. The bell above the cafe door gave its hollow chime as the large frame of Tobias strode in, followed closely by Maria. Tobias immediately took his usual seat at the corner booth, while Maria leaned against the counter, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. Shaniqua arrived last, as always, the static hum of the in-between growing sharper as she stepped inside. Her presence was magnetic, commanding attention without a word. Shaniqua wasted no time. Cain, she said, her sharp gaze locking onto him. Report. Cain straightened instinctively. Yeah. Training's going well. I've been learning the basics of dungeon mechanics and scenarios, so I don't embarrass myself out there. Also, I've started martial training at a dojo north of Crystal Gate. Tobias raised an eyebrow. You got in. Cain nodded. The Kempo no Numa. Shihan there seems like the real deal. He's even letting me stay there for one-on-one training. Shaniqua's expression didn't shift, but the subtle nod she gave carried weight. Good. You'll need every advantage if you're going to keep up. She turned to Tobias. He needs a final evaluation. Schedule it as soon as possible. Tobias frowned slightly but nodded. Understood. Maria grinned, nudging Edgar with her elbow. Hear that? No more babysitting duty. Edgar snorted. About time. I've had enough of scraping slimes off my boots. The group chuckled, the tension easing slightly. As the conversation shifted to dungeon assignments, Cain leaned forward on the counter, his curiosity getting the better of him. So, if Death's running the whole operation, why doesn't he pop in and give us a pep talk? You know, meet the squad. The normal banter of the group stopped cold. Shaniqua's expression darkened, her usual composure giving way to something colder. Death isn't someone you meet, Cain, she said, her voice low and deliberate. He's not a person. He's an entity. Your mind couldn't begin to comprehend him. Cain raised an eyebrow, unfazed. Come on, Shaniqua. It can't be that bad. What's he gonna do? Glare me into submission? Shaniqua stepped closer, her tone sharp and unyielding. I've glimpsed the thought of his presence, and I'm S-rank. If someone like you, a newly minted E-rank, were even in the building next door, you'd be in the fetal position for a month. That's if you survived with your mind intact. Her gaze didn't waver as she continued. You wouldn't just break. Your soul would shatter into 1,000 pieces, scattered across the void, and you'd become nothing. No afterlife. No second chances. Eternal dust. Cain blinked, sitting up straighter. So no meeting then. Got it. The group giggled at that, breaking the tension. Cain chuckled nervously, though Shaniqua's words lingered like a shadow in the back of his mind. Shaniqua straightened, her commanding presence immediately recapturing the group's focus. Before we wrap this up, I need everyone to send me your updated aid reports. I'll be filing team metrics with other Reaper units across the country. The faint hum of static in the in-between seemed to deepen as each member turned their focus inward. Cain raised his hand, making a subtle series of gestures that activated the aid chip embedded in his head. A faint pulse of light flickered behind his eyes as the data transmitted, displaying his current stats and achievements in his mind's eye. Done, Maria said casually, leaning back against the counter. Same, Edgar muttered, his fingers already brushing the edge of his mug again. Cain fumbled with his glyph for a moment before nodding. Okay, mine sent. Hope it doesn't crash the system with my overwhelming greatness. Tobias snorted from his seat in the corner booth, his dark eyes narrowing as he glanced at Cain. You might want to tone down the sarcasm until your numbers match that ego, rookie. Shaniqua raised an eyebrow as she skimmed through the reports. Interesting. Cain's soul count has jumped significantly since last month. Tobias folded his arms across his chest. That's because I've been offloading most of my clears to him. Maria's grin widened. Really? Since when did you turn into a bleeding heart, Tobias? It's not compassion, Tobias said flatly, his voice tinged with impatience. I need Cain to hit Class D as soon as possible. The faster he ranks up, the sooner I can start focusing on C-rank dungeons instead of dragging him through the E-rank grind. Edgar smirked. So this isn't about helping Cain, it's about escaping the kiddie pool? Exactly, Tobias replied without hesitation. Every soul I hand over is one step closer to me not being stuck babysitting. He leaned back, his arms crossed tightly, and let out a frustrated huff. Penny's been absolutely milking the fact that my Class C ass is acquainted with the hollow blade. She's got us running delves every day, sometimes twice a day. She expanded their territory coverage to 500 miles. Do you know how many dungeons we've cleared this month? 40. 40. It's exhausting. So don't give me any shit about how you're tired of running bees. He shot a pointed look at Edgar. Or how you're sick of C's. His glare shifted to Maria. Maria raised her hands defensively, her grin unwavering. Someone get this man his coffee. Cain raised a hand, feigning offense. Wow, you really know how to make a guy feel special, Tobias. You want special? Earn it, Tobias shot back. And don't screw up the souls I've handed you. Every one of them counts toward getting us out of this rut. Shaniqua nodded approvingly. Practical and efficient. I expect to see Cain at Class D by end of year. That's 3 months for those that can't count. She looked directly at Cain, ensure that happens. Cain glanced at his aid display again, noting the sharp jump in his soul count. He muttered under his breath, so I'm a project now. Cool, cool. Dungeon Regulation and Oversight Bureau, DRB. Adventure Information Database. Legal name, Cain Rose. Registration ID, DRB, E1031306666. Affiliation, Guild Certified Adventurer, Hollow Blade. Rank, Class E. Attribute score, Strength 52. Stamina 54. Speed 71. Magic 97. Aptitudes and flaws. Registered merits. Physical proficiency, moderately above average speed, and magic compared to Class E adventurers. Analytical reasoning, demonstrates creative problem-solving in non-standard scenarios. Resilience, shows moderate psychological resilience under pressure. Registered flaws. Combat inexperience, minimal training and minimal field achievements in dungeon clearing missions. Skill assessment. Ethereal transference allows the user to shift into an incorporeal state, phasing through physical obstacles and evading attacks. Draining grasp drains physical and magical strength from targets upon contact, weakening them while temporarily enhancing the user. Spirit blade summons versatile spectral weaponry, capable of shifting between forms such as a sword, hammer, or scythe, tailored to the combat scenario. Performance record. 43 rank E dungeon clears have been registered to DRB. Behavioral note. Exhibits a tendency toward procrastination and overcompensation in social and professional scenarios. Employment status. Currently affiliated with Hollow Blade Guild. Cain's eyes fluttered open, and he immediately realized he wasn't in bed. The cool, hard tiles beneath his cheek confirmed it. With a groan, he pushed himself up from the dojo's small bathroom floor, blinking as the harsh overhead light came into focus. Every time, he muttered, brushing himself off. Trips to the in-between always left him feeling like he'd just had the best nap of his life, no matter how jarring the return. It was one of the few perks of being a Reaper, instant refresh mode, even if he occasionally woke up in weird places. He glanced at his watch. Still time to make it back to HQ, he said, running a hand through his hair. After a quick change of clothes, Cain grabbed his keys and headed to the Battle Wagon. The 1994 Geo Metro sputtered to life on the third try, its rumbling engine oddly comforting. As he pulled out of the dojo's lot, the early morning light cast long shadows across the quiet streets. The guildhall was buzzing when Cain arrived, more crowded than usual. He parked the battle wagon in the back lot and stepped inside, greeted immediately by the sharp scent of coffee and the low hum of chatter. Grim. Penny's voice cut through the din like a whip. She stood near the mission board, flanked by two unfamiliar faces. Cain approached, taking in the newcomers. The first was a wiry man with sharp eyes and a fidgety energy, his fingers tapping idly against his belt. The second was a woman with a broad stance and a confident smirk, her hand resting casually on the hilt of a well-worn longsword. "These are the new recruits," Penny said, gesturing to them. "Try not to scare them off, yeah?" "Me?" Cain said with mock offense. "I'm the picture of approachable." Penny ignored Cain's quip, pointing to the wiry man. "This is Felix. He's a scout, quick on his feet, decent instincts, but needs work on teamwork." Felix gave Cain a nod, his fingers still tapping against his belt in an almost rhythmic pattern. "Nice to meet you. Heard you're the hollow blade's weirdest weapon enthusiast." His eyes flicked to the kusarigama at Cain's side, curiosity lighting up his expression. Cain smirked, adjusting the chain coiled on his hip. "Guilty as charged. Let me guess, you're a longsword purist." Felix grinned, shaking his head. "Nah, longswords are overrated. I'm more into things with a bit of personality." But that, he gestured toward the kusarigama. "That's a conversation starter." Penny turned to the woman. "And this is Elise. Solid fighter, good head for tactics. Already has a few clears under her belt." Elise extended a hand, her grip firm when Cain shook it. "Looking forward to working with you." "Likewise," Cain said, quickly adjusting his thoughts. Elise carried herself with quiet confidence, her sharp gaze taking in everything without being obvious about it. Felix stepped forward, his grin widening. "Speaking of working together, what do you say to a quick spar? I've got something that might just rival your little chain hooky thing." Cain raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "Oh, yeah? What's your gimmick?" Felix unfastened a weapon strapped across his back and set it upright with a clink. It was a sadagarami, a spiked pole arm with barbed hooks along its head. "I call it the troublemaker," Felix said, giving it a quick spin. "It's a tool for crowd control, or at least, that's what it was originally made for. Great for tripping, snagging, and, ruining someone's day." Cain blinked, taking in the bizarre weapon. "That's a rake with an attitude." Felix smirked, slamming the butt of the weapon into the ground. "More like a bad day on a stick. What do you say? Let's see how that kusarigama holds up." Cain tilted his head, both startled and impressed. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" Penny sighed loudly. "Great. Two weird weapon maniacs in the same room. This'll go well." Elise stepped back, crossing her arms as she watched the exchange. "This I've got to see." Cain smirked, loosening the chain on his weapon. "All right, Felix. Let's dance." Penny threw her hands in the air and turned toward the hallway. "Bria Jumper, get down to the training room. We're probably gonna need you to patch up some self-inflicted wounds again." From somewhere deeper in the guildhall, Bria's muffled voice called back, "Already on my way." Felix chuckled, twirling his sadagarami in a wide arc. "Sounds like she knows you well." "Let's just say it's a recurring theme," Cain muttered, rolling his shoulders as he walked with Felix to the training room.